What if I told you that the most influential person in human history operated with psychological patterns that completely defy everything we know about leadership, power, and human nature? Jesus of Nazareth didn't just break religious rules. He shattered every psychological principle that governs how humans typically behave under pressure, authority, and crisis. Today, we're uncovering 3 impossible psychological secrets that made him the most paradoxical figure who ever lived. By the end of this video, you'll never see leadership, sacrifice, or human potential the same way again. These aren't just religious insights. They're psychological revelations that challenge our understanding of what makes someone truly powerful. Here's something most people completely miss about Jesus. He possessed what psychologists call impossible confidence, a psychological state that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about human behavior. Think about this. Every single leader throughout history who faced persecution, betrayal, and certain death either broke down, fought back violently, or tried to escape. It's basic survival psychology. Fight, flight, or freeze. These are hardwired responses that have kept humans alive for millennia. But Jesus, he did none of these. When facing the most powerful empire in the world, knowing he would be tortured and executed, he remained not just calm, but actually more confident and purposeful than before. This defies what we call threat response psychology. Normal humans, when facing existential threats, experience what researchers call cognitive narrowing. Their thinking becomes limited, focused only on immediate survival. Their stress hormones flood their system, their decision-making becomes impaired, and their ability to think long-term completely shuts down. Yet historical accounts describe Jesus becoming more articulate, more focused, and more intentional as the threats against him intensified. During his trial before Pilate, when any normal person would be begging for mercy or at least defending themselves, he spoke with such composure that even his executioner was disturbed. Pilate, a man who had overseen countless executions, was so unsettled by Jesus' behavior that he tried multiple times to release him. This isn't just unusual. It's psychologically impossible according to our understanding of human stress response. What was happening in his mind that allowed him to transcend basic human survival instincts? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of human potential itself. The secret lies in what modern psychology calls transcendent purpose, orientation. But Jesus took this to a level that has never been replicated in human history. While most people operate from what psychologists call ego-based motivation, driven by self-preservation, status, or personal gain, Jesus operated from what we might call species-level thinking. Here's what this means. Most humans, even the most altruistic ones, still have a psychological self that they're ultimately trying to protect or enhance. Mother Teresa helped the poor, but she was still Mother Teresa helping the poor. Gandhi fought for independence, but he was still Gandhi fighting for independence. There's always an identity, an ego, that remains central to the mission. But Jesus exhibited what appears to be a complete dissolution of ego-based motivation. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't making a religious claim. He was describing a psychological state where individual identity had merged with universal purpose. This is why threats to his personal safety didn't trigger normal stress responses. You can't threaten someone who no longer operates with a separate sense of self. Psychologists have documented this state in advanced meditators and mystics, but never to this degree and never under such extreme pressure. When facing crucifixion, most accounts describe Jesus as concerned not with his own suffering, but with the spiritual state of his executioners. He asked for their forgiveness, even while being tortured. This level of psychological transcendence has never been documented in any other historical figure facing similar circumstances. Modern neuroscience suggests this kind of consciousness requires a fundamental rewiring of the default mode network in the brain. the neural circuits responsible for self-referential thinking. Somehow, Jesus had achieved what spiritual traditions call ego death while maintaining complete functional capacity. He could teach, lead, and make complex decisions, but without the psychological barriers that normally limit human behavior under stress. This wasn't just confidence, it was the absence of the psychological structures that create fear, defensiveness, and self-preservation in the first place. Think of human psychology like a smartphone with a protective case. The case is our ego. It protects the phone from damage, but it also limits what the phone can do. It makes the phone bulkier, harder to use, and blocks some of the camera lens. Most people go through life with this protective case on because removing it feels too risky. Jesus somehow removed the protective case entirely while keeping the phone fully functional. He could access capabilities that the protective case normally blocks, but he was also completely vulnerable to damage. The difference was, he no longer feared the damage because he understood that the phone wasn't really separate from the entire network it was connected to. This is why he could love his enemies, forgive his torturers, and maintain clarity under extreme pressure. When you don't have a separate self to protect, threats lose their psychological power over you. It's like being afraid someone will steal your shadow. When you realize the shadow isn't actually you, the threat becomes meaningless. Modern psychology calls this post-conventional consciousness, but Jesus lived it so completely that it became his default operating system. While most people occasionally glimpse this state during peak experiences or deep meditation, Jesus appears to have made it his permanent psychological home. This wasn't just spiritual evolution, it was a complete reconstruction of human psychology that allowed him to access potentials that remain dormant in most people, and this was just the beginning of his impossible psychology. If this is exploding your head, leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Here's the second impossible thing about Jesus' psychology. He possessed what researchers call radical empathy, the ability to understand and connect with anyone, regardless of their background, beliefs, or behavior toward him. But this wasn't just being a good listener or having social skills. Jesus demonstrated a level of psychological understanding that seems to violate the basic limitations of human perspective taking. Normal empathy has built-in constraints. We can understand people who are similar to us or people whose experiences we can imagine. We struggle to empathize with those who threaten us, who hold opposing values, or who operate from completely different worldviews. It's called empathy gap. Our ability to understand others is limited by our own psychological boundaries and defensive mechanisms. Yet Jesus consistently demonstrated the ability to see straight into the core psychological patterns of people who were nothing like him. He understood the rich young ruler's attachment to wealth, the Samaritan woman's shame about her relationships, and Pilate's fear of political consequences. He saw through the Pharisees' religious posturing to their deeper need for security and status. He recognized the disciples' ego-driven competition for who would be greatest. But here's what's truly impossible. He could do this even with people who were actively hostile toward him. When someone is attacking you, normal human psychology activates defensive responses that actually impair your ability to understand your attacker. Your brain shifts into threat detection mode, which narrows your perspective and makes you interpret everything through the lens of self-protection. Jesus not only maintained empathic accuracy under attack, he seemed to increase it. The more hostile someone was toward him, the more clearly he could see their underlying pain, fear, or confusion. This defies everything we know about how stress affects cognitive empathy and perspective-taking abilities. The secret to Jesus' radical empathy lies in what psychologists call perspective-taking without perspective-holding. Most humans see others through the filter of their own psychological position. We have needs, fears, goals, and identity structures that color how we interpret other people's behavior. Even when we try to be empathetic, we're still looking from our own psychological location. Jesus appears to have developed the ability to temporarily abandon his own psychological position entirely when understanding others. It's like he could step completely outside his own perspective and see from a neutral, universal viewpoint. This allowed him to understand people's motivations without judging them through his own needs or fears. Modern psychology has identified this capacity in advanced therapists and spiritual teachers, but never to this degree. When Jesus looked at the woman caught in adultery, he didn't see her through the lens of moral judgment, like the Pharisees, or personal attraction, like many men might. He saw her core humanity and the circumstances that led to her choices, without any filter of his own agenda. This is why his responses to people were so unexpectedly healing. He wasn't trying to fix them, convert them, or get something from them. He was simply seeing them completely, often for the first time in their lives. When someone sees you without agenda, without judgment, and without needing you to be different than you are, it creates space for profound psychological transformation. The neurological basis for this kind of empathy involves what scientists call theory of mind, networks in the brain, but operating without the usual interference from self-referential processing. Somehow, Jesus could activate the neural circuits for understanding others while simultaneously quieting the circuits that maintain psychological self-boundaries. This wasn't just compassion, it was a form of psychological X-ray vision that could see through people's external behaviors to their core motivational patterns, and do so with perfect accuracy even under conditions that normally make empathy impossible. Imagine trying to take a perfect photograph of someone while looking through a kaleidoscope. The kaleidoscope is beautiful, but it fragments and distorts everything you see. It's impossible to get a clear picture of your subject because the kaleidoscope's patterns interfere with your vision. Most human empathy works like photography through a kaleidoscope. Our own psychology, our fears, needs, judgments, and past experiences acts like the kaleidoscope, fragmenting and distorting how we see others. We think we're seeing them clearly, but we're actually seeing them through the patterns of our own psychological filters. Jesus somehow learned to remove the kaleidoscope entirely. He could see people with crystal clear accuracy because his own psychological patterns weren't interfering with his perception. This is why his interactions with people were so transformative. When someone sees you without distortion, without agenda, without the filter of their own needs, it's like being seen for the first time. This level of empathic clarity allowed him to respond to people's actual needs rather than their surface behaviors. When the Pharisees brought him the adulterous woman, everyone else saw scandal, sin, or political opportunity. Jesus saw a human being trapped by circumstances and choices worthy of understanding rather than condemnation. The psychological freedom this created was revolutionary. When people felt truly seen and understood without judgment, they naturally began to see themselves more clearly too. This is why encounters with Jesus often led to immediate psychological transformation, not because he told people what to do, but because he created space for them to see themselves without the distortion of shame, fear, or defensiveness. And subscribe now, because the third case that follows will completely change your perspective on human nature. Now we come to the most impossible psychological characteristic of all. Jesus demonstrated what researchers call suffering transformation, the ability to transmute personal pain into universal healing. This isn't just resilience or endurance, it's a psychological mechanism that appears to violate fundamental laws of human emotional processing. Normal human psychology works like this. When we experience pain, trauma, or injustice, our minds naturally develop protective mechanisms. We build walls, create defensive strategies, and often become harder or more cynical as a result of our suffering. It's basic psychological survival. Pain typically makes us more self-protective, not more open and generous. Even people who help others because of their own past pain usually do so while maintaining some psychological distance to protect themselves from re-experiencing that pain. Wounded healers help from a place of, "I've been there, and I don't want you to go through what I went through." There's still a self that's being protected. But Jesus exhibited something that psychologists have never documented. He seemed to transform his own suffering into a direct channel for healing others, without any protective barriers whatsoever. During his crucifixion, arguably the most intense physical and psychological pain possible, he was actively concerned with comforting others. He assured the thief beside him, provided for his mother's care, and asked for forgiveness for his executioners. This isn't just unusual, it's psychologically impossible according to our understanding of how consciousness responds to extreme pain. When humans experience severe physical or emotional trauma, the mind naturally contracts, focusing all available resources on survival and pain management. Higher cognitive functions like empathy, long-term thinking, and concern for others typically shut down entirely. Yet Jesus appears to have used his suffering as fuel for expanded consciousness and greater compassion. The worse his situation became, the more concerned he became with others' well-being. This suggests a form of psychological alchemy that transforms the base metal of personal suffering into the gold of universal healing. The secret lies in what we might call suffering without identification. Most humans suffer as a self. There's an I that's experiencing pain, and that I naturally wants the pain to stop. This creates what psychologists call resistance to suffering, which actually amplifies the psychological distress beyond the physical reality of the situation. Jesus appears to have developed the ability to experience pain without the additional layer of psychological resistance that comes from having a self that's trying to escape the pain. When there's no separate self to protect, suffering becomes simply information rather than a threat to be resisted. But he went even further. He somehow learned to use suffering as a doorway into deeper connection with universal human experience. Instead of contracting around his own pain, he expanded into recognition that his suffering was connected to all human suffering. This allowed him to transform his personal experience into a channel for healing collective human pain. Modern neuroscience shows that pain and empathy activate overlapping neural networks. When we see others suffer, our brains literally simulate their pain. Jesus appears to have reversed this process. He used his own pain as a way to connect with and heal the suffering of others. This is why the crucifixion became psychologically transformative for witnesses, even those who participated in it. The centurion who oversaw the execution declared, "Truly this was the Son of God." Not because of what Jesus said, but because of how he suffered. Watching someone transform the worst possible circumstances into an expression of love and forgiveness challenges everything we think we know about human nature. Psychologically, Jesus demonstrated that suffering doesn't have to diminish us or make us more self-protective. When approached without ego-based resistance, pain can become a catalyst for expanding our capacity for love, understanding, and connection with others. He proved that the human psyche has potentials that remain largely unexplored in normal human experience. This wasn't just spiritual transcendence, it was a complete revolution in how consciousness can relate to difficult experience, transforming suffering from a contracting force into an expanding one. Picture a violin string. When you pluck it normally, it makes a pleasant sound. But if you want to create truly beautiful music, you have to stretch the string to create tension. The greater the tension, the more pure and powerful the tone becomes. But here's the key. The string has to be strong enough to handle the tension without breaking. Most human psychology is like a weak string. When life stretches us with pain, suffering, or challenges, we either break, trauma, breakdown, or we resist the tension, denial, numbness, defensiveness. Either way, we don't make beautiful music. Jesus was like a perfectly constructed string that could handle infinite tension. But instead of just enduring the stretching, he learned to use the tension to create the most beautiful sound possible. His suffering didn't break him or make him defensive. It turned him into a perfect instrument for healing. The crucifixion was like stretching that string to its absolute maximum tension. Instead of breaking or producing a harsh, discordant sound, he created a note so pure and powerful that it resonated through all of human history. People who heard that note, who witnessed how he transformed agony into love, were forever changed. This is why his death became more transformative than his life for many people. Anyone can inspire others when life is good, but transforming the worst possible circumstances into an expression of perfect love, that demonstrates capabilities in human consciousness that most people never imagine are possible. Jesus proved that suffering doesn't have to diminish human potential. It can actually unlock it if we learn to stop resisting and start transforming. He showed us that the deepest pain can become the deepest healing, but only when we approach it without the psychological barriers that normally protect us. These three impossible psychological characteristics, transcendent purpose beyond ego, radical empathy without barriers, and suffering transformation without resistance, reveal why Jesus remains the most paradoxical figure in human history. He didn't just teach about human potential, he demonstrated capacities that psychology says shouldn't exist. If these three cases exploded your mind, smash the like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. And tell us in the comments, which of these revelations surprised you most? Turn on the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about human nature. This analysis is speculative and based on historical and theological accounts, not clinical diagnosis. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only.